Hello and welcome to this overview, if you will, the making of this particular music video called The City. So in just a bit, I'll be taking you through some of my processes in terms of looking at the music, creating this song in Logic. I'll do some voiceover for you and talk about how the music evolved. As well, I will discuss the nature of the visual images, and these are essentially stock video clips from videoblocks.com. And they now call themselves storyblocks.com. They also do audio. They do a variety of different kind of stock media that basically you can download. So I'm using these stock video clips. Originally, I had planned to do something entirely different with this. My goal was to use the Critter and Guittari ETC. This essentially is a video synthesizer. So this allows me to take either audio or MIDI input from one of two inputs, a typical quarter-inch jack in the back, modulate the video through HDMI out, which I can record using the audio signal, or the MIDI signal. If you're familiar with MIDI, you know MIDI can be very useful in a variety of musical senses, in this case a visual sense. Essentially, using that information, it modulates the signal. It has a gain dial up here, so I can control essentially the amount, almost the amplitude of the sound to modulate the video in some different ways. There's a series of modes, and this includes a little mini USB drive, and I think it's a system called Python. I'm not a coder, but you can code, or you could download different modes. So the different modes here, you can toggle through, and this allows you to, again, use the sound or the MIDI to modulate your video. Let me put up on the screen here just some samples of what I intended with this. So this shows you some of the modes here with the ETC. So I ended up not using this because I thought it just didn't fit the music. It's one of those subjective things, but sometimes you'll be playing a piece of music and you have something in mind. And of course, in classical music, we have a distinction between absolute music, which, I guess you would think of a Bach prelude or something like this. The idea is that it's formal and functional and melodic and harmonic and rhythmic. But it doesn't necessarily tell a story, the absolute music. Programmatic music is, in a sense, the reverse. It's the equivalent of, say, a theme space in consumer spaces. So essentially, it tells a story. Mussorgsky's Pictures and Exhibition, classic example of programmatic music, right? As you're going through the various vignettes, the various themes which are named by the composer, you can really see like the gnome, or when you are viewing those images, right? If you're the viewer hypothetically looking at things, that incredibly heroic melody that plays through, that's an example of telling a story using the music itself. Now, of course, in contemporary music, there's a variety of different approaches, and it's maybe not so easy to distinguish between this dichotomous absolute music and programmatic music. But take that as you will. I think what happens is when we write music, sometimes we have something in mind. So I'll talk about the music side of this later. But basically, I intended to use the ETC on this. And to wrap up my discussion of this, in addition to all the modes I showed you, you can use these other controls. You can control the background color, the color of the things that are sprouting or moving around in the patterns that you see. And then also you can control a variety of different coordinates, like the amount of multiplication, say, of different patterns or images, and then also X, Y coordinates, or different things based on the mode that you choose. So it was my intention to use this, and I want to use it in future songs. I have some in mind, actually. I was making some notes the other day, but it didn't work in this case, because what I had in my mind was something different in terms of like the imagery behind the music that I pictured. And I developed this over time, and of course things change, so it's a constant paralleling or dialogue between the music and the video. Now, in using stock clips, of course, I'm limited to what's on hand, but I like that particular creative challenge. It's a bit of an obsession I have with locating stock clips using keyword searches on a video site like VideoBlocks or StoryBlocks.com, and then trying to piece those together doing various techniques. And I'll talk about that process in just a little bit here. The second thing I wanted to do, in addition to using the video synthesizer, was to use, and I'll put those up here now, basically a real-time scrolling through the score that is created in Logic of all the parts, and there's 20 or so tracks. So I did a video of this and I thought, okay, I'll have that playing. I'll maybe intersperse that with some of the ETC synthesized images, and it just didn't look very good. It just didn't fit at all. I kind of knew immediately that this didn't work. So I shifted gears a bit and I said, let me go back to my stock footage. And I went back and forth with the images I had in my mind, and I often do this where I have a piece of music and to me it might convey something visually. I try to then take that and translate that into some visual medium. I think it's a hard thing to do sometimes because, again, you might be limited by what you could either shoot, what you could produce with a video synthesizer, what you could find, of course, in a stock image site or something like this. In a lot of cases, I don't have the time or ability, say, to go out and shoot the kind of images I want to create my own music videos. So I think this is another advantage of using the stock photography site. In this video today, I'm doing a little bit of the making of the city, and I wanted to focus on this paralleling, this dialogue between the images that you see on the screen as you watch this song music video, and then the music that is playing at the same time. So let me now shift into the next focus here in this video on the city. Okay, so I'm going to go through how I put this video together for the song called The City. One of the things I wanted to do was to as I said earlier, sync the video with the music. I didn't necessarily have the idea of the city in mind when I started this project. But one of the interesting things about any song is that a song has its own structure. So this particular song has an introduction. It goes into an opening part that introduces the electric piano parts, the bass part, some of the surf guitars, and the percussion. Then it goes into a break section, and then it transitions into this minimalistic section with the electric pianos kind of doing this contrapuntal kind of thing, arpeggiated whole tone type stuff, and you'll see later in the video where that ties in. And then after that it goes into a transition into a final section that's a pretty big build and has really the full ensemble with the strings coming in, the high strings which are significant, all the percussion parts, the electric pianos, and then the guitars and the bass. And so basically, there's a structure to a song when you create it, so that allowed me then to map this onto the video itself. And essentially it falls into 4 sections: awakening, density, sublimation, and inhabitation. So when I decided that this music I thought would fit well with the idea of a city or spaces or something like this, I think part of the influence was that years ago I started working on a song cycle when I lived in London, based on the city of London. I never did video for that, and I maybe will do that someday with those old tracks, but with this new track I thought it would fit in with the city, the idea of the city. And then the other influence on this was that I'm currently working on a chapter on urbanism, and so I think my brain's been focused on the city. So when I go to VideoBlocks or Storyblocks.com, as it's called now, I can type in a word like city, and then I can come up with all the stock footage. So there were a lot of different opportunities here. It's sort of a surprise when you see the various footage. A lot of shots, obviously, of buildings. I downloaded initially a lot of these long shots of skylines. There's a lot of New York in here, of course, as you might imagine, as a metropolis. There's also sections within cities that are like smaller structures, bridges and stuff, and I ended up not using any of those. And there also is some interesting stuff, which are these like graphical representations. And as you'll see in the video, or if you saw the video, these play a pretty big role kind of in that final build where I wanted to use something that was very abstract. And since it's talking about sublimation, I wanted to have something that was beyond the naturalistic or the realistic that you see with all the other footage. So I thought I would use that at some point. And I also then collected some shots of people as well. And there are hundreds and hundreds of clips here. So if I take you to the Final Cut Pro layout here, what I started to do was I laid down my tracks, so I did a mix down, and then after that I created my title and just some opening music, and then I thought, it should open up with something that shows the emergence of the city, and so for me this is really the awakening section, section 1, and that parallels with the music. that continues all the way through these shots of the various cityscapes. And then this is a transition point where we shift into that second part of the music. We pan up the top of the building, and then we get into section 2, and this is called density. So there's two types of footage here, images of people and then images of traffic, and specifically cars in New York and other cities. What I wanted to do here was to overlay a series of these types of traffic images of people and cars and so forth, sort of to parallel the idea of density with notions of, say, alienation, which will come up at the end of the video. So you see shots of the various traffic shots, and then there's this great image, or video rather, of a couple on a street. And so I just adjusted, in all these cases, I'm just messing with the opacity and laying it on top of the other video. And in this particular case, I really like this composition of the woman's face, and then to the right there's the man's face, and you can kind of see it there. And so I thought it would be a nice composition to just have really predominant most of the screen, and then behind that have images of people walking, and there's also this image of a woman on a skateboard. Again, I didn't say I want a woman on a skateboard, it just so happened that this is what came up with the city search. So what I like about this is the limitations of the stock photography, footage, video forces you, I think, to do some creative things in terms of storytelling and connecting it to the music. So I really like this particular composition where you have the faces that, in a sense, bracket the left and the right of the screen. So what happens next then, there's more of the traffic and people walking, and I did an overlay of quite a few clips here that you can see. It's did a few in reverse, so you get this perspective or movement. And then we get into the third section, which is the sublimation, and this is again where we see these graphic abstractions of cities. So I found, it must be from the same person who created these, a series of these. This one is really interesting, and I overlaid a bunch of these and just skewed the X and Y coordinates and moved them here and there and up and down and left and right. And then I this wasn't quite working here, this section where I have these abstract representations, so I found this cool blueprint that I thought would be a good way to represent sort of the abstraction of the city and architecture and so forth. And then after that section, we go into the final one, which I call inhabitation, and it's really quite simple in a sense. They're just two clips. So a clip of this couple walking in the city, and I really liked how just the composition of the shot, you know, they're wearing backpacks or whatever, and they're smiling most of the time. And then as you can see, underneath that, on the overlay, the composite, I have this image of a guy here, which I adjusted the exposure, made it black and white, and did a vignette effect because I thought it was just a really sort of ominous, you know, individual versus the city kind of contrast here. This happens to be Toronto looking across the water, and this individual is, you know, looking across the city. So that's the inhabitation. And my sense on this final section, you know, thematically would be just how humans take, you know, part in the city, how they take a role, how they inhabit it, and so forth. And if I had more time or more video, maybe I would get into alienation, which again, I think is suggested earlier with some of that video. So what I did was, you know, again, I had my track laid out, just the one final track, and then I adjusted some edits here and there just with the music timing. I wasn't too particular about things changing on the beat, but just I wanted these 4 sections represented as best as I could, using the video to contrast or to connect, rather, to have a dialogue with the music. So let me show you now, back here on the screen, some of the approaches I took in terms of the music for the city. Okay, I thought we'd take a look then here at some of the music and how this tied in with the video. So you can see the tracks here with Logic. One of the things I like to do is to have the different types of sounds organized, so you can do this, of course, with the track colors. So I can have all my strings here and a couple pads as well. Have those in green. As I started working on this song, the electric piano became more and more, I guess, important. Initially, you just hear it with some punches. And this gets repeated a couple times with the there are 4 tracks of electric piano. And so in some cases I'm just doing things with the panning here or the octaves of the part that's being played. So I have the electric piano signified with blue, and then all the percussion parts, and most of the percussion are drum loops. I can show you just what I use. So in Kontakt, I ended up using the Heaviosity Damage loops for a lot of this, which I think are really incredible. You can adjust these, the loop, the sequencer, you can add distortion, lo-fi, all sorts of filtering and so forth. And so for the main initial drum loop, initially I had a different sound, and I wanted something mellower and kind of a bottom end sound, which this has that quality to it. So that's playing. And the other thing you'll note is the bass part. So it has a very percussive tone to it, and let's open that up. And this is 8 Dio's bass starred grooves. This is the groove patch. There are also straight patches you can play as well. And so this is, I think, a pretty interesting bass collection they put together. What I like about this particular sound is that it's very, I think, reminiscent of, say, the stick, the Chapman stick. It has that type of sound. It's very percussive, and that's carried throughout the entirety of the song. So all the way through the end, you have just that one patch playing. So what I have been doing recently is combining, in a lot of this music, combining loops. So you have 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 drum loops, and then you have the bass loop. Everything else is played on top, so I already talked about the electric pianos. I have a, I should mention the guitars first. So I have these pretty interesting, I label them grunge guitars. I'll just play some of those and open up and show you. To me, this sounds kind of like a surf guitar, is the sound that is reminiscent. So this is East-West. This is a really interesting collection of sounds called Ghostwriter, and it's one of the guys associated with the progressive rock band Porcupine Tree. So it's just incredible what they've done with the amp modeling, and just done some really phenomenal things. It has drums, vocals, keys, bass, and guitar. So many of the guitars you're hearing then are these guitars. All the guitars you're hearing actually are from this Ghostwriter collection. The volume is kind of low here, but what these guitars remind me of are almost like a surf guitar sound in terms of just the quality of the sound, the amp, and so forth. So a lot of what I'm playing with both here and then later with the electric pianos, it has this quality of almost like etudes, practicing etudes where you go up and down the scale, the octaves, and so forth. And that's really what I wanted with this. And when I created the video, I decided that this would connect quite well with just shots of people and traffic in the city. So you'll get a lot of that type of, I guess, writing in this song, where you have these up and down movements. A lot of stuff in A minor. There's a lot of it has a sort of whole tone feel to it. There isn't a lot of chromatic stuff. The only chromatic stuff that happens is, I'm trying to think if there's any, but at the end, let's see here, we can switch to the score view. These octaves are so low it's hard to tell. But basically when the electric piano plays, there's 3 parts of the electric piano playing at the end, kind of this ostinato pattern that's going up 4 tones, whole tones, up the scale. I'm doing a little bit with harmony here, but the leading tone into the next measure has a sharp to it, or a flat. So that's the only chromatic stuff that's, I would say, really going on in the whole song. And you just see some of that here with the electric piano. You can hear it play. And then here we get the leading tone. And so you kind of get the point there. So again, not a lot of chromatics, so you just get the whole tones going up and down the scales. The string parts, I think that's it on the... oh, and I mentioned that, you know, some of the drums were played. So for example, I added some cymbals on top just as accents. Right, and so you can understand that. Adding those on top of the pre-existing loops, and there's a few of those where I ended up playing those. Again, the music, as I mentioned, the video section breaks down, I think, kind of nicely, such that you get this sense of sections, and I think that's intentional when you write songs. Sometimes you have that sense of intentionality about breaks and stuff. I always like a lot of percussive elements, and then this particular section breaks into a different section, and there's a break here, and then we get this new melody going, which has kind of this minimalistic flair. Throughout, you get the punches of the chamber ensemble sound. Sorry, just play that for you. So the very, you know, staccato, or I guess more pizzicato, and this is a patch that is pretty much just a stock woodwind type patch, chamber ensemble patch. As far as the strings, there's a lot happening. Not as much initially. I have a pad sound that plays in the beginning of the song, and then at the end I double a little bit that chamber ensemble song with some high strings, and then we have a low string ensemble right here. I can play you that. And this is just going up, let's see, E, F, G, A, and C, D, E, F are kind of the two variations I do. Again, no chromatic stuff, keeping those whole tones. This particular patch is, I think, a really good one. Another 8-Dio library. This is the Majestica strings, the sustains. 8-Dio does some amazing libraries. They're pretty spendy, but I generally say they're worth it. The other one I didn't use in the song is their choir one, which is equally amazing. And so likewise, that same ensemble continues with the higher strings. So just doubling basically. And I'm usually panning those opposite just for some variety as we're listening. And then what became kind of the theme that was really interesting to me was this final string theme here. And we're just going C, A, B, G, A, F, G, E down the scale and continuing that. So again, keeping that whole tone focus. And to me, this is sort of the dramatic part of the ending of the song, because it's carrying this melody, and it's, I think, layered pretty well on top of the other string patches. Now, the other part of the end of the song that's key are these electric piano, I guess I call them ostinato, but this is, I think, for me, was building the tension at the end of the song. And so it's very similar to what you're hearing earlier. So we're going D, E, F, G, and some variation of that. The other variation is A, B, C, D, so we get a little dissonance there in the middle two notes. And I decided to do this rhythmically with the electric piano because to me it was contrasting with the very nice lush sounds of the strings that, of course, very legato and don't have this percussive quality to them. I think I use electric piano a lot in compositions because it works well as a rhythmic instrument. Of course, you could have, sustain Fender Rhodes or whatever, but this particular patch I thought worked really nicely with some of the rhythmic stuff. And this is from, by the way, let's load that up, Omnisphere, and it's 90s Keys Vibe Dry, and this is one of their keyboards. If you know anything about Omnisphere, Spectrasonics, Just amazing, amazing patches. Some of the stuff when you get into their noisescapes are just, amazing as far as just the quality of the sound and the creativity. They're doing so many unique things with all kinds of created instruments and ethnic instruments and layering them on top of one another and doing some incredible modulation within their own custom modulation engine. So the electric piano from Spectrasonics Omnisphere. I hear their new keyboard collection, I think is it called Keyscapes, is quite amazing as well. Haven't purchased that one yet. So yeah, I think those are all the parts. Again, for me in Logic, it's very useful to lay out the tracks according to sections, to color code them. I'm doing a little bit with fades and dynamics. I have to say with a lot of the stuff I mix, I know mixing is a fine art, and it's a challenge certainly to mix, and so it's still something I'm perfecting, perhaps as you're perfecting as well, working with your music. So that's kind of a take on the some of the approaches to the music here, and I think that's going to conclude the video feature today here, looking at some of the approaches here to putting together the music and the video for this song that I call The City.